They yanked it straight out of the concrete like it meant nothing. My disability parking sign, authorized by the city, mounted by professionals, and approved by my doctor, disappeared one Thursday morning without a trace. I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw the empty space where it used to stand. Just a patch of scraped-up gravel and fresh tire tracks. I'm Mason Bellamy. I'm 52, a retired paramedic with a spinal injury that left me with permanent mobility issues. I walk with a cane and rely heavily on that reserved spot in front of my house, especially on days when my knees feel like glass. That spot wasn't a favor. It was a necessity. Now, that Thursday, I wasn't imagining things. I stood there, blinking at the gouged-up earth like it might explain itself. I knew exactly who did it. HOA business. Sylvia Newhall's voice rang from behind me, sharp as a broken bottle. She was standing at the edge of her porch in that ridiculous wide-brimmed sun hat she always wore like she was allergic to clouds. Sign didn't meet aesthetic standards of the neighborhood, she added, arms folded like she was proud of herself. I turned around slowly, my cane digging into the dirt. That sign was legally installed. You had no right. She waved a hand dismissively. We have rules, Mr. Bellamy. You should have submitted a request before installing something so disruptive. It's a disability sign, not a billboard. We don't make exceptions. I could feel my pulse start to climb. I dealt with her before she ran our HOA like it was her personal fiefdom, with a clipboard in one hand and a threat of fines in the other. She once fined my neighbor for using blue mulch. Another time, she tried to dictate what kind of curtains people could have if they were visible from the street. But this was criminal. You stole city property, I said flatly. She gave a tight plastic smile. It was in violation of HOA standards. We notified code enforcement. They agreed it was improperly placed. Code enforcement? I narrowed my eyes. I'll be calling them myself. You do that, she said, already turning on her heel. I didn't waste time. I hobbled inside, grabbed my tablet, and started pulling up documentation. I had everything: photos of the sign installed, the permit number, the approval letter from the city, even the invoice from the company that installed it. I wasn't some clueless homeowner. I'd filed it all when I got the sign put up last year. I emailed the city's public works department. Then I called and waited. The next day, I got a response from a guy named Ruben from the city ADA compliance office. He confirmed what I already knew: the sign was authorized and legally protected. No one, not even an HOA, had the right to remove it. Who did you say removed it? He asked. The HOA, specifically a woman named Sylvia Newhall. She's the president. There was a pause. You said they physically removed it? Yep. Sometime between Wednesday night and Thursday morning. I have a security camera. I haven't checked the footage yet. Ruben sounded interested now. If you can send me that footage, we may be looking at an ADA violation, possibly theft of municipal property, depending on who took it. Give me an hour, I said, and hung up. I spent the next 45 minutes scrubbing through the footage. Sure enough, at 2:16 in the morning, a white HOA maintenance truck rolled up beside my curb. Two men in neon vests hopped out, unbolted the sign, and loaded it into the truck bed. One of them shined a flashlight directly into the camera at one point, but I still had their faces, clear as day. I flagged the footage, trimmed it, and emailed it to Ruben with every bit of documentation I had. Then I waited. 3 days later, Sylvia showed up again. This time she didn't stay on her porch. She marched right up my sidewalk like she owned the place, clipboard in hand. Mr. Bellamy, I need to speak with you about the threatening email you sent the city. Threatening? I raised an eyebrow. You mean the one where I reported your illegal removal of my disability sign? We're not criminals, Mason, she snapped. We're enforcing community standards. You stole a federally mandated disability aid. That's not enforcing. That's criminal. You're exaggerating, she said, but I could see something flicker behind her eyes: uncertainty. I stepped out onto my porch and leaned on the railing. You want to talk about exaggeration? My knee gave out yesterday because I had to park a block away. That sign existed for a reason. You decided your aesthetic standards mattered more than the law. That's not just arrogant, that's dangerous. She tried to pivot. If you reapply through the proper HOA channels, no, I cut her off. I'm not applying for permission to breathe. That sign's coming back, and this time it's staying. You'll be lucky if all you get is a warning. Sylvia's nostrils flared. You're making this into a spectacle. You think anyone here supports you? I tilted my head. You really want to find out? Because here's the thing Sylvia didn't realize. I'd already been having quiet conversations with a few of my neighbors. The ones who got fined for flowers planted 2 inches over the sidewalk. The guy who got a warning for parking his work van in his own driveway. The nurse down the street who got cited for excessive wind chimes. Sylvia had been making enemies for years. I was just the first one to draw the line publicly. She turned and stormed off, but I didn't go back inside. I waited. Exactly 4 hours later, I got a call from Reuben Mason. We've escalated your case to the city attorney. Also, building code enforcement found no record of any complaint filed against your sign. That means the HOA lied to us. Didn't surprise me, I said. The attorney's requesting a formal meeting. They want you there. Can you come by next Tuesday? I'll be there. And Mason, there's a chance this could lead to their license being pulled. I felt a slow, satisfying heat spread through my chest. Good. I wasn't just going to get my sign back. I was going to bury the whole rotten HOA system they'd built on threats, lies, and a clipboard. Tuesday came with a breeze that whispered of change. I wore my pressed navy shirt, the one I hadn't touched in months, and took a cab to City Hall. The cane clacked with every step down the marble corridor, a rhythm that matched the pulse in my ears. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The conference room was tucked behind a frosted glass door labeled Municipal Oversight and Compliance. Inside, a long table stretched under fluorescent lights. Reuben was already seated, flanked by 2 people I hadn't met yet. One, a woman with a steel-gray pixie cut and a folder thicker than a phone book. The other, a man in a charcoal suit with a badge clipped to his belt, silent and scanning everything with the eyes of someone who saw through lies for sport. Mr. Bellamy, Reuben said, standing. Glad you made it. I nodded and took a seat across from them. This is Aaron Valdez, City Attorney's Office, and Detective Linford from the Property Crimes Unit. The detective gave a nod but said nothing. Aaron opened the folder and flipped through several pages. We've reviewed the footage and documentation you submitted. The removal of your disability sign constitutes unlawful tampering with ADA infrastructure, which is federally protected. More concerning is the falsified report to City Code Enforcement. That's a Class C misdemeanor. They sent a crew under cover of darkness, I said. That's not ignorance. That's an operation. Aaron tapped a page. And it gets worse. We did a sweep of recent complaints and found that the HOA's been submitting similar falsified reports for over a year. In multiple cases, the city had no record of the alleged violations. But homeowners were still fined or forced into compliance. Reuben leaned forward. They've been fabricating municipal backing to muscle residents. That's coercion, and it violates several local ordinances. Linford finally spoke, his voice low and clinical. We'll be interviewing the crew that removed the sign. If they were acting under false pretenses, that's impersonation of a city contractor. If they were aware, that's conspiracy. I looked between them. What happens next? Aaron closed the folder with a soft thud. We're initiating a formal inquiry into the HOA's charter. If we prove deliberate misconduct, the city can revoke their operating license. The state's HOA regulatory board will be notified. They might face civil penalties or criminal charges, depending on what shakes loose. I left that meeting with a copy of the formal complaint and a list of city departments now involved. It was no longer just about a stolen sign. This was a full-blown investigation. That evening, I knocked on my neighbor's door, Patrick, the guy with the work van. Mid-40s mechanic lived in the same house for nearly 20 years. He opened the door with a confused look. "You got a minute?" I asked. He stepped aside and motioned me in. The living room smelled like motor oil and coffee. On the wall hung a faded photo of him in a jumpsuit, standing next to a dirt track racer. "They're going down," I said, handing him a printed notice of the city's investigation. Patrick's eyes scanned the paper. "You serious? They crossed a line. I'm collecting statements. Want yours?" He didn't even hesitate. "Hell yes." Over the next week, I became a one-man canvas operation. I hit every house on my row, then the next block over. I spoke to the woman with the wind chimes. Her name was Carla, and she worked night shifts at the hospice center. She'd been fined twice for noise violations, despite living alone and keeping her yard cleaner than a hospital floor. Turns out, the real issue was the memorial chimes she'd hung after her mother passed. Sylvia had called them morbid. I met a veteran named Jorge who'd been warned for flying a flag larger than the HOA's approved dimensions. He still had the letter, signed by Sylvia herself, citing a non-existent regulation. He handed it to me with a grim smile. "They always counted on us not pushing back," he said. "Guess you changed that." I compiled everything. Photos, letters, testimonies. I created a digital binder and sent it to Erin. A few days later, she called with news. The city had issued a temporary suspension of the HOA's authority pending the outcome of the investigation. They couldn't fine anyone, approve permits, or hold meetings. Their power was frozen. Word spread fast. Sylvia, now suddenly less visible, stopped making her usual patrols. No more clipboard strolls. No more handwritten warnings tucked under windshield wipers. Her porch lights stayed off most nights, and her pristine flower beds started to wilt. But the silence didn't last. One morning, a black SUV rolled into the neighborhood. Unmarked, but official-looking. Two men and a woman stepped out wearing state emblems on their jackets. They went door to door, asking questions. I watched from my window as they entered Sylvia's house. They were inside for 40 minutes. Later that day, Detective Linford called. "We've confirmed the HOA submitted multiple forged documents to city departments. The crew they hired to remove your sign, private contractors, paid in cash, no paperwork." I let that sit in the air for a moment. "So where does that leave them?" He didn't sugarcoat it. "We're recommending criminal charges against the HOA president and treasurer. Fraud, conspiracy, and unauthorized removal of regulated infrastructure. The DA's reviewing it now." That night, I walked outside and found a group of neighbors gathered near Jorge's porch. Someone had brought folding chairs. Someone else had brought cookies. Carla was passing around copies of the city's suspension notice like it was a victory flag. Patrick raised a soda can in my direction. "To Mason, the guy who remembered this is still a free country." I chuckled, lifting my cane. "To all of you, I just lit the match. You carried the fuel." Sylvia's house stayed dark that evening. Rumor was she'd gone to stay with her sister in the next county. No one seemed to miss her. The following week, I received a letter from the State Regulatory Board. The HOA's charter had officially been revoked. Their leadership was barred from holding any positions in community associations for 5 years. A third-party administrator was appointed to manage the transition, oversee finances, and hold new elections. The best part. My sign was reinstalled this time by a city crew in broad daylight with fresh concrete and a protective barrier. They even added a second sign on the opposite end of the street, making it clearer for visiting vehicles. A few days later, I received a thank you card in the mail. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us. We see you, we've got your back." Below it, a single sentence. "Never underestimate a man with a cane and a plan." I pinned it to my fridge. The HOA that once ruled with threats and fake authority had collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. And the neighborhood? It finally felt like it belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones who thought they owned it. We started talking about forming a new association, voluntary, transparent, and neighbor-led. No fines. No power trips. Just a shared commitment to keeping the block safe, clean, and fair. And this time, anyone who thought about abusing that trust, they'd have to go through me first. 2 weeks after the HOA's charter was revoked, I got an unexpected knock at the door just after sunrise. A man in a brown suit stood on my porch, his eyes alert but not unfriendly. He held up a badge without introduction. "Mr. Bellamy, I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Greg Holloway. I'm here about the HOA investigation. Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He entered, scanned the room as if cataloging every detail, then sat at my dining table when I gestured toward it. "I've read your statement," he began, pulling a slim black folder from his briefcase. "What started as a local zoning violation has escalated into something federal. We've uncovered a pattern of wire fraud, embezzlement, and ADA interference across multiple properties managed by this HOA. This isn't isolated to your street." I leaned forward. "You're saying they've done this in other neighborhoods?" He nodded. "We believe Sylvia and her treasurer, a man named Ronald Peck, created a shell organization posing as a licensed maintenance contractor. They used it to siphon HOA funds and submit inflated invoices for services that were either never performed or wildly overpriced." I folded my arms. "And the money disappeared into personal accounts, offshore in some cases. We're working with financial crimes on that." But the ADA violation was the thread that unraveled everything. "Your documentation and camera footage gave us the first prosecutable act with clear evidence." I let out a long breath. "So what happens now? We've issued a federal warrant for both Sylvia and Ronald. Sylvia's sister claimed she left town, but we have reason to believe they're attempting to flee the state. This morning, we intercepted communications suggesting they were preparing to transfer funds from a private brokerage that wasn't on our radar." I stared at him. "You need something from me?" He slid a single page across the table. "Testimony. We need you to appear before a federal grand jury next month. Your case is the linchpin." I read the paper carefully. It was straightforward. I signed. As Holloway prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "One more thing. You're not in any danger, but if either of them contacts you, call this number immediately." He handed me a card embossed with a Department of Justice seal. After he left, I stood at the window, watching the wind stir the trees. I had no idea this went deeper than our block. The HOA hadn't just bullied neighbors with fake fines and ridiculous rules. They'd orchestrated a multi-layer financial scam wrapped in suburban respectability. Later that afternoon, I headed to the community center where the interim administrator was holding an open forum. The room was packed, filled with faces that used to avoid eye contact in driveways or glance nervously during Sylvia's morning patrols. Now they were alert, engaged, leaning forward in metal chairs arranged in crooked rows. The administrator, a woman named Dina Glenshaw, stood at the front with a calm, assertive presence. She had no clipboard, no smugness, no threats, just a laptop and a stack of printed financial statements. She tapped the top sheet. "Over the last 18 months, your HOA reported over 120 service calls for landscape maintenance, security patrols, and signage enforcement. Of those, at least 80 were billed through a company called Pine Horizon Services." She clicked a slide. The screen behind her displayed a blurry logo and a P.O. box address. "This company doesn't exist. It's not registered with the state, doesn't have a business license, and it's listed phone number routes to a disconnected line. According to banking records, payments from your HOA account were funneled into a private trust controlled by Ronald Peck." A murmur spread across the room like a ripple through glass. Then Dina continued. "We've also found documentation showing that several of you were fined for violations that were never voted on or recorded in board minutes. These include mailbox colors, window treatments, and vehicle decals. The fines were deposited into a separate account not disclosed during annual financial reports. Carla, standing near the back, raised her hand. Are we getting any of that money back? Dina tilted her head. The city is working with federal investigators and a restitution attorney. Once assets are recovered, residents will be prioritized, but I can't promise a timeline. Patrick leaned forward from the front row. What about the elections? We need new leadership that actually lives here, not some outsider with a law degree. Dina smiled faintly. That's why I'm only here temporarily. A special election will be held next month. Any resident in good standing can run. And yes, that includes those previously fined under false pretenses. Those violations are being expunged as we speak. Jorge crossed his arms. Can we vote on dissolving the HOA completely? Dina nodded. You can. State law requires a 2/3 majority and filing with the Department of Community Affairs. I'll be providing forms and walking everyone through the process if that's the direction you want to go. By the time the forum ended, people weren't just asking questions, they were forming committees, sharing contact information, and drawing up plans. I watched from the corner, unseen for the most part. That was fine by me. I wasn't in it for recognition. I just wanted my street back. That night, as I returned home, I noticed something strange on my porch, a plain manila envelope, unmarked. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single flash drive and a typewritten note. You don't know me, but I used to work for Sylvia. She kept everything. If you're going to bury her, use this. No signature, no contact info. I plugged the drive into my computer and opened the only folder. Inside were dozens of PDFs, invoices, emails, scanned checks. But one file stood out, a recording labeled HOA call transcript MP3. I clicked play. It was Sylvia's voice, unmistakable and sharp. You tell them it's a city violation, they won't question it. Most of these people barely read their own mortgage paperwork. If they push back, slap them with a compliance letter. Call it a health code concern. Use whatever phrase sounds scary. A low male voice replied, and if they ask for the ordinance, make one up. They never check. You want control. You take it. People are sheep. I stared at the screen, fists clenched. The next morning, I forwarded everything to Holloway. An hour later, he called. Mason, that recording changes everything. She just confessed to orchestrating a fraud scheme across state lines. That's federal racketeering. What's the penalty for that? Could be 20 years. And just like that, the final nail was ready. 2 days later, the news broke. U.S. Marshals found Sylvia and Ronald in a rental cabin in Pennsylvania, halfway packed for a drive to Canada. They were taken into custody without incident. The next morning, every mailbox in the neighborhood had a letter from the city confirming the charges. Wire fraud, racketeering, ADA interference, and obstruction. The local paper ran the headline, HOA crime syndicate dismantled after disabled resident fights back. I didn't talk to reporters. I didn't need to. A week later, I watched from my porch as the new neighborhood committee met under a canopy tent in Carla's yard. No suits, no hidden agendas. Just people with notepads and folding chairs trying to make things better. As for me, I finally planted the raised garden bed I'd been putting off for over a year. No approval forms, no warnings taped to my door. Just soil, sunlight, and the sound of wind chimes drifting gently from the house down the street. The garden bed in front of my house was finally thriving. Sunflowers were stretching tall, bold and unapologetic, while cherry tomatoes clung to their vines like they knew they had a place now. I kept the soil damp, the weeds low, and my chair parked nearby for the quiet afternoons. But calm doesn't always mean finished, not when there are still questions in need of answers. 2 weeks after the arrests, I got a phone call from a name I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as Special Agent Dana Kruger from the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Office of Inspector General. Her voice was clipped, efficient, but not cold. We're conducting a joint audit with the IRS, she said. We've uncovered evidence that the HOA applied for federal community development funds under false pretenses. I'd like to speak with you about several documents you submitted. I agreed to meet the following day at the city's administrative annex, a squat gray building that had once been a library. When I arrived, Agent Kruger was already waiting in a windowless conference room. She had a laptop open and beside it, a thick file stamped with multiple agency seals. She gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Bellamy, thank you for coming. I'll be brief." During our forensic review of the HOA's financials, we discovered a series of grant applications filed over the past 3 years. They claimed your neighborhood was undergoing accessibility upgrades, things like sidewalk ramps, tactile paving, even a mobility shuttle. I blinked. "None of that ever happened," she nodded. "We know. The funds were approved based on falsified documentation, including fake photo logs and forged contractor invoices. Over $180,000 were dispersed." I folded my arms. "Where did the money go?" "Into multiple accounts tied to shell LLCs. We traced them back to Ronald Peck. In some cases, the funds were laundered through real estate investments in another state." My grip on the armrest tightened. "And Sylvia," she co-signed several of the applications. "Her digital signature appears on every quarterly report. This shifts the case into federal territory, specifically grant fraud under Title 18 of the U.S. Code." I shook my head slowly. "They use disability as a cover to steal federal money." "That's a new kind of low." Dana pulled up a document on her screen and turned it toward me. "This is where you come in. You filed a legitimate request for a disability parking designation. It was cited in one of the grant applications as proof of community need. They even included a photograph of your house." I stared at the image, my front steps, my old mailbox, my cane leaning against the porch railing. "They used you," she said. "As their poster child without your knowledge or consent." I looked up. "What happens to them now?" "The U.S. Attorney's Office is expanding the indictment. Sylvia and Ronald are being charged with federal grant fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the government. If convicted, they'll be looking at long-term incarceration and asset forfeiture." I didn't say anything for a while. Just nodded slowly as the weight of it all settled in my chest. When I got home that evening, a small crowd had gathered outside Carla's house. I spotted Jorge handing out flyers and Patrick setting up a plastic folding table with stacks of papers. Carla waved me over. "We're organizing a vote," she said, tapping the flyer. "Dissolution, official. We've got the signatures, now we need the turnout." I scanned the paper. It laid out everything: the legal process, the meeting date, and a proposed neighborhood charter that focused on voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance. Jorge leaned in. "We even called in a nonprofit that helps communities transition out of failed HOAs. They'll help us set up a community trust instead. Funds go to park cleanup, sidewalk repairs, stuff that actually helps people." I nodded. "Count me in." The vote was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. We held it in the high school gymnasium just outside the neighborhood lines. Word had spread fast. Every house received a printed notice, and volunteers went door to door for those who didn't have internet access. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was nearly full. Inside, a volunteer checked my name off the list and handed me a ballot. The gym smelled faintly of waxed floors and popcorn from a vendor someone had set up near the entrance. As I walked toward the voting tables, I passed faces I hadn't seen in years, people who had gone silent under Sylvia's reign, now talking, laughing, even hugging. It was like the air had changed. At the front, Dina stood beside a ballot box, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Bellamy," she said warmly, "glad to see you here." I dropped my ballot in the box. "Feels like it's finally moving forward." She lowered her voice. "It is. And I wanted you to know you've been nominated for the advisory board of the new community trust, unanimously." That stopped me. You started this," she said, "and people trust you. No one else stood up when it counted." I didn't answer right away. Eventually, I just nodded. The vote passed with over 90% support. The HOA was officially dissolved. The city processed the paperwork within a week. and the new trust began organizing its first cleanup event, removing the last of the old signage and repainting the public benches Sylvia once tried to have torn out for being too utilitarian. The next few weeks were a blur of restoration. Volunteers fixed cracked pavement. Local artists painted murals on utility boxes. Someone even organized a community garden in the vacant lot behind the school. What had once been a place of tension and quiet resentment was becoming something else, something honest. One afternoon, while I was watering my tomato plants, a car pulled up in front of my house. A woman stepped out mid-40s, blazer over jeans, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as a representative from the Office of Victim Compensation. "We're coordinating restitution for those impacted by the fraudulent HOA practices," she said. "Your name is at the top of the list." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't lose any money." "Technically, that's true," she said, "but you were used as a false justification for a federal grant scheme. You were also denied access to mobility accommodations which caused documented physical hardship. That qualifies." She handed me a letter. I opened it and read the figure. It wasn't life-changing, but it was more than symbolic. "There's also a civil suit being prepared," she added. "A class action. If you choose to join, you'll be represented along with other impacted residents." I thanked her, and she left with a firm handshake. As the sun dipped lower, Patrick walked over from across the street. He was holding a battered envelope. "This was in my mailbox," he said, handing it over. "No stamp, no return address." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed a table covered in cash, a clipboard beside it, and Sylvia's unmistakable hand pointing at a map of our neighborhood. Patrick whistled low. "Someone's still leaking info." I tucked the photo into my pocket. "Let them. Every piece helps keep the truth from fading." That night, I sat on my porch, the quiet hum of cicadas filling the air. My disability sign stood tall and untouched, now flanked by a solar-powered light that clicked on softly at dusk. Across the street, kids were drawing chalk galaxies on the sidewalk. Carla's wind chimes sang against the breeze. The fear that had once clung to this place was gone. In its place, there was a kind of earned peace, rough around the edges, but real. I didn't win this fight because I was clever. I didn't win it because I yelled the loudest. I won because I documented everything, because I didn't back down. Because I believed that if you shine a light long enough, even the worst shadows scatter. Sylvia and Ronald were gone. The HOA was dead, and our neighborhood, it belonged to us again.